All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking on something I think a lot of you are dealing with in your work.
Yeah, for sure.
Scrum. We're going deep, we're going right to the source, to the very heart of it, with the 2020 Scrum Guide by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland.
Definitely a must-read if you're serious about Scrum.
Absolutely. So think of this as your personal guide, your cheat sheet, to really understanding this framework, like a direct line from the source to you.
Yeah, I like that, a direct line. And it's important to highlight that the Scrum Guide, first written in 2010, has been continuously refined and updated over the years, with the current version we're looking at from November 2020.
Right. It's the definitive guide. And one of the things that really struck me right from the get-go is how the guide defines Scrum. It calls it, and I'm quoting here, a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems.
It's amazing, isn't it, how it sort of cuts through all the noise and gets to the essence of what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, whenever someone mentions Scrum, my mind instantly goes to software development. It's kind of where it all started.
Right. But it's fascinating how Scrum has really spread its wings. I mean, you see it now in all kinds of fields. Anywhere there's complex work that needs to be done.
Exactly. So many people are probably using Scrum principles without even realizing it.
That's a great point. And that actually brings up something important the guide addresses right away. This notion of developers.
Right, the word can throw people off.
Totally. It can make you think it's just for coders, for tech folks, but it's much broader than that. The guide makes it clear that developers in the context of Scrum means anyone on the Scrum team who's creating the product increment, the valuable output that comes out of each sprint. So if you're part of a team using Scrum to tackle complex problems, you're a developer in the Scrum sense.
I like how you put that in the Scrum sense. It's important to keep that in mind because the terminology can be a little, specific.
Absolutely. And here's another thing I think is worth highlighting. This framework isn't some rigid set of instructions. It's not paint by numbers.
Yeah, it's not a manual, right?
Exactly. It's more like a blueprint, like a framework, as the name suggests. It intentionally leaves space for you to adapt it to your specific needs and circumstances. The Scrum Guide provides the essential rules for how people interact and collaborate, but it doesn't dictate every single step or technique.
So let's get into the basics, the core of how Scrum works. The guide lays it out in 4 simple steps.
Okay, I'm ready.
First, you have a product owner. Their job is to take all the work needed to solve a particular problem and organize it into something called a product backlog. Think of it like a master list, a to-do list for the product.
Makes sense.
Then comes the sprint. This is where the magic happens. During the sprint, which is a fixed time box, by the way, the Scrum team grabs a chunk of work from that product backlog and, they transform it. They turn it into what's known as an increment of value.
So we're talking about a usable piece of the product, a tangible step toward the final goal, right?
Exactly. It's something real, something you can see, and in many cases, something you can actually use.
Okay, that's 2 steps. What's next?
Next comes the crucial part, feedback. It's time for the Scrum team, along with the stakeholders, the folks who care about the product, to take a look at that increment, to inspect it. What did we achieve? What did we learn?
What needs to be adjusted?
Exactly. What needs to change for the next sprint? It's all about that constant cycle of evaluation and improvement.
And then step 4, you rinse and repeat. That's the heart of it. Plan, build, inspect, adapt, and then you do it all over again, sprint after sprint. That's how Scrum helps you navigate the complexities of work and deliver value, not all at once, but bit by bit.
And the guide stresses this point that Scrum itself is simple. It really encourages teams to try it in its entirety, to really embrace the whole framework, the theory, the structure, the philosophy behind it, to see if it works for them. It says, try it as is and see what happens.
Right. Don't start cherry-picking elements. Give it a go in its true form.
Exactly. And underlying all of this are 2 fundamental principles: empiricism and lean thinking.
2 powerful concepts.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what exactly is empiricism? At its core, it's about making decisions based on what you actually observe, on what your experiences tell you. It's very practical.
It's about saying, let's not just theorize, let's experiment. Let's try things out and see what happens in the real world.
And lean thinking, what's the big idea there?
Lean thinking is about getting rid of anything that doesn't add value. It's about maximizing value while minimizing waste. It's about being efficient and focusing your energy where it matters most.
So in a nutshell, you're saying cut the fluff, Focus on what delivers value.
Precisely. And to put these principles into action, Scrum relies on an iterative and incremental approach.
Can you break that down for us a little bit? What do those terms actually mean?
Sure. Iterative basically means working in short cycles, those sprints we talked about. Instead of trying to do everything at once, you break the work down and repeat the process. Plan, build, inspect, adapt over and over again.
Okay, makes sense.
And incremental means you're building your product or solution piece by piece in small, usable chunks, those increments we mentioned. This way, you can get feedback along the way, make adjustments, and manage the inevitable risks that come with complex projects.
It's like building a puzzle, putting it together one piece at a time.
A perfect analogy. And who's doing all this work? We keep mentioning Scrum teams. What's the deal with those?
They're the heart of the operation.
Scrum teams are small, cross-functional, and self-managing.
Let's unpack that a bit.
Okay, so cross-functional means that within the team itself, you've got all the skills you need to get the job done. You don't have to constantly rely on people from outside the team.
Like you've got all your bases covered?
Exactly. And self-managing means the team decides who does what, when, and how. They're empowered to organize their own work, to make decisions about the best way to achieve the sprint goal.
Got it. So to really make this inspection and adaptation process work, Scrum sets up 4 formal events that happen within each sprint.
These are key. They provide structured opportunities to pause, reflect, and adjust.
What are those events and what's their purpose?
We've got sprint planning, the daily scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. Each one focuses on examining a different aspect of the process, the product, or the team itself.
And together, they create a kind of rhythm, a predictable flow for the work.
Right. And the Scrum Guide is pretty clear. If you skip these events or don't conduct them as intended, you're missing out on crucial opportunities to inspect and adapt, which can really throw things off track.
Yeah, they're not just suggestions.
Nope. And they're also designed to minimize the need for all those other meetings that can crop up in a typical work environment. They help you streamline things, focus on what matters.
So let's take these events one by one, starting with the sprint itself. It's called the heartbeat of Scrum in the guide.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence.
So what exactly is the sprint?
It's a time-boxed event, usually a month or less, where you take those ideas and turn them into something valuable. And as soon as one sprint ends, guess what? The next one begins. No time wasted. It's a continuous cycle.
All those Scrum events, the planning, the daily check-ins, the review, the retrospective, all happen within the sprint.
That's right. And there are a few ground rules for what goes on during a sprint. You can't make any changes that would jeopardize the sprint goal. That's the main objective for the current sprint.
Okay, so the sprint goal is like the North Star. You didn't want to deviate from that.
Exactly. And you never want to compromise on quality. That's a non-negotiable. The guide is very clear on that.
Makes sense.
And throughout the sprint, you can refine the product backlog. That's the master list we talked about. If new information comes up or you learn something unexpected, you can even clarify or renegotiate the scope of work within the sprint backlog with the product owner.
Got it.
But again, you don't mess with the sprint goal. That remains the focus.
So sprints help bring predictability to Scrum. They provide that regular opportunity to check in, to adapt, to ensure you're moving towards that overall product goal at least every month.
Right. And the guide does mention that there's a bit of a trade-off when it comes to sprint length. Shorter sprints, say 2 weeks instead of 4, can lead to more frequent feedback loops.
So you're learning and adjusting more often.
Exactly. Which can be especially helpful when you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, where things can change quickly. Each sprint is like a mini project, a contained effort with a specific objective.
And speaking of uncertainty, the guide makes a point of saying that while forecasting tools, like burn-down charts, can be helpful, they don't replace empiricism.
Right, because with complex projects, you can't predict the future perfectly. You have to rely on what you observe, on what's actually happening to make the best decisions.
So you're constantly learning and adapting.
Always. And one last thing about the sprint. It can be canceled, but only if the sprint goal becomes obsolete, like if the market takes a sudden turn or the business needs shift drastically.
And who has the power to hit that cancel button?
Only the product owner. That's their call.
Okay, so let's dive into the first event within the sprint planning. What's the point of this gathering?
Sprint planning is all about the team, the whole Scrum team coming together to hammer out a plan for the upcoming sprint. Everyone's involved.
Okay, everyone has a voice.
Yeah, and the product owner comes prepared to talk about the most important items in the product backlog, how they connect to that big picture product goal.
Makes sense.
And they might even invite other stakeholders to join in, people who can offer valuable insights or specific technical knowledge.
So it's a collaborative effort.
Totally. And during this sprint planning event, they tackle 3 fundamental questions. The first is, why is this sprint valuable?
Okay, so they're establishing the purpose.
Right. The product owner explains how this sprint will increase the value of the product, and then the entire team works together to define the sprint goal. This sprint goal spells out why this sprint is important, why it matters to the stakeholders, and by the end of sprint planning, everyone needs to be on the same page, fully aligned on that sprint goal.
Got it. What's the second big question?
Question number 2 is, what can be done this sprint? This is where the developers get down to business.
Okay, they're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, they work with the product owner to choose a set of product backlog items. Those are the tasks or features that might be developed that they believe they can realistically deliver within the sprint time box.
And they have to consider a lot of factors, right?
They do. They have to look at how they've performed in the past, their capacity for the upcoming sprint, and the requirements outlined in that definition of done we mentioned earlier.
Right, because that sets the bar for what done actually means.
Exactly. And the better they understand all these factors, the more accurate their forecast for the sprint will be.
Okay, and what's the final question they grapple with during sprint planning?
The last question is, how will the chosen work get done? This is where the developers really take ownership. They map out the steps, they create a detailed plan for how they're going to deliver those selected product backlog items as a finished increment.
So they break it down into manageable chunks.
Yeah, they often split bigger tasks into smaller ones, ideally things that can be completed within a single day. And here's the crucial part. The how is entirely up to the developers.
They have autonomy.
Complete autonomy. No one else on the Scrum team or in the organization dictates how they work. They decide the best approach based on their skills and expertise.
Okay, so at the end of sprint planning, what have they created?
All the decisions they've made, the sprint goal, the chosen backlog items, the plan for delivering them, all of that together forms what's known as the sprint backlog. It's essentially the roadmap for the sprint.
The developer's guide for the next couple of weeks.
Right. And sprint planning, like all Scrum events, is time-boxed.
So there's a time limit. How long do they have?
For a 1-month sprint, the maximum is 8 hours. For shorter sprints, it's proportionally less time.
Keeps things moving. Now on to the next event, the daily Scrum. This one is much shorter, right?
Yeah, it's a quick one, just 15 minutes.
What's the goal? What do they do in those 15 minutes?
The daily Scrum is a check-in for the developers. They get together, same time, same place, every single workday of the sprint to inspect their progress towards that sprint goal and to see if they need to adjust their plan for the rest of the sprint.
So it's about staying aligned, keeping everyone in the loop.
Precisely. And if the product owner or the Scrum Master are actively working on items in the sprint backlog, well, they participate as developers in the daily Scrum.
They're all in it together.
Exactly. And here's another example of the developer's autonomy. They get to decide how to structure these daily Scrums. They choose the techniques, the format, whatever works best for them.
As long as it helps them reach the sprint goal.
Right. As long as they come out of it with an action plan for the next 24 hours.
So it's not about micromanaging every minute of the day.
Nope, it's about giving them the freedom to figure out the best way to work. And these daily Scrums have some real benefits. They improve communication, help catch any potential problems early on, make decision-making faster, and often reduce the need for all those extra meetings that can bog things down.
Streamlining things. I like it.
And remember, the daily Scrum isn't the only time the developers can adapt their plan. They make adjustments as needed throughout the day, but the daily Scrum serves as a vital synchronization point, a time to ensure everyone is on the same page.
Okay, moving along in this sprint, we get to the sprint review.
A time to see what's been accomplished.
What exactly happens during the sprint review? What's its purpose?
The sprint review is all about examining what came out of the sprint, that increment we talked about, and figuring out what needs to be tweaked or adapted going forward.
So it's a feedback loop.
Yeah, a really important one. The Scrum team shows off the results of their work to the stakeholders. They talk about what they achieved and discuss how things are progressing toward that overall product goal.
It's a chance to get everyone on the same page and to make sure the team is on the right track.
Precisely. They talk about what they did, what changed, and what to do next. And the product backlog might even get updated based on this new knowledge.
So it's a collaborative session.
Yeah.
It's not just about showing off a finished product.
The Scrum Guide really emphasizes that it's a working session, not a presentation. Everyone gets involved.
Okay, I like that. And is the sprint review also time-boxed?
It is. For a 1-month sprint, it's a maximum of 4 hours. Shorter sprints, you guessed it, shorter review. And it always happens right before the last event of the sprint retrospective.
So we're almost at the end of the sprint. What's the sprint retrospective all about? It seems to be more internally focused.
You're right. This one is all about the team looking inward and figuring out how to work better.
Okay, a time for reflection.
Exactly. They look at the sprint that just ended, at how they work together, at the processes, the tools, and how well they stuck to the definition of done.
So they're identifying what worked, what didn't, and how to improve for next time.
Right. They talk about any assumptions they made going into the sprint and why they made them. They celebrate what went well, they analyze the problems, and they discuss how those problems were solved. It's a safe space for honest, open conversation.
And by the end of the sprint retrospective, what are they aiming for?
The goal is to identify specific, actionable changes they can make to improve both the quality of their work and their overall effectiveness as a team.
So they're coming up with concrete steps to take.
Yeah, and the most important improvements, they try to address those right away, maybe even adding them to the sprint backlog for the next sprint. The sprint retrospective marks the official end of the sprint. And like all Scrum events, it has a time limit.
How much time do they have?
The maximum for a 1-month sprint is 3 hours, and again, it's adjusted for shorter sprints.
So we've covered the Scrum events. What's next?
Now let's get into the Scrum artifacts. These are the things that represent the work, the value that's being produced. And they're designed to be totally transparent.
And why is that transparency so crucial?
Transparency is what allows the team to make informed decisions, to adapt as needed. It's about making sure everyone is on the same page and can see what's happening, what's working, what's not.
Okay, makes sense. So what are these key Scrum artifacts?
We've got 3. The product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment. And each one has a specific commitment tied to it. This is a big part of what keeps things transparent and focused in Scrum.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with the product backlog. We touched on it earlier as the master to-do list. What's the official definition and what's that commitment you mentioned?
The product backlog is like a living document. It's a prioritized list of everything that might need to be done to improve the product. It's the single source of truth for all the work the Scrum team tackles. And the commitment linked to the product backlog is the product goal.
That product goal again. So how does it fit into the picture with the product backlog?
Think of the product goal as the guiding star for the product backlog. It paints a picture of the desired future state of the product. It's a target the team is aiming for. And all those items on the product backlog, they're the steps, the building blocks for reaching that product goal.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. And the guide defines a product pretty broadly, right?
It does. It could be a physical product, a service, even something more abstract. What matters is that it delivers value, that it has clear boundaries, that you know who the stakeholders are and who the users or customers are.
Got it. And the product goal, that's a long-term objective, right?
Right. It's not something you achieve overnight. The Scrum team focuses on one product goal at a time, working on it until it's either fully realized or they decide to shift gears and pursue a different objective.
All right, let's move on to the next artifact. The sprint backlog. What's that all about and what commitment is tied to it?
The sprint backlog is all about the here and now. It's the plan for the current sprint. It includes the sprint goal, that's the why, behind the sprint, the specific items from the product backlog that the team has chosen to work on for the sprint, that's the what, and the plan the developers have created for delivering those items, that's the how.
It's their roadmap, their game plan.
Exactly. It's a living document created by the developers for the developers. It's a clear, visible picture of what they're working on, what they plan to accomplish, and it gets updated throughout the sprint as they learn more as things change. The sprint backlog has to be detailed enough so that the developers can accurately track their progress during those daily scrums.
Right, so they can tell if they're on track or if they need to adjust.
Precisely. And the commitment associated with the sprint backlog is the sprint goal.
So the sprint goal is like the anchor, the guiding force for the sprint backlog.
Exactly. It provides the focus, the shared objective that keeps everyone moving in the same direction. And while the developers commit to achieving the sprint goal, they have the flexibility to figure out the best way to get there.
They have that autonomy we talked about.
Right. The sprint goal keeps everyone aligned, it promotes collaboration, they define that goal during sprint planning, and then it becomes an integral part of the sprint backlog.
And they keep that sprint goal front and center throughout the sprint.
Always. And if things don't go exactly as planned, if new information comes up, they can work with the product owner to adjust the scope of work in the sprint backlog without jeopardizing the overall sprint goal.
Okay, last but not least, we have the increment. What is that exactly, and what commitment is linked to it?
An increment is like a milestone. It's a concrete, tangible step towards achieving the product goal. Each increment builds upon the previous ones, so it's really important to ensure that they all work together seamlessly.
So it's not just a bunch of random features, it's a cohesive piece of the final product.
Right. And to truly deliver value, an increment has to be usable, even if it's not ready to be released to users just yet. You can create multiple increments within a single sprint, and at the end of the sprint, during that sprint review, the team shows off all the increments they've created.
So the stakeholders can see what's been accomplished, provide feedback.
Exactly. It's all about that transparency and empiricism we talked about.
And you can deliver an increment even before the sprint ends, right?
Absolutely. The sprint review shouldn't be a bottleneck for releasing value.
Okay, that's an important point. But there's a catch, isn't there?
There is. No work is considered part of the increment unless it meets the definition of done. And that brings us to the commitment tied to the increment, the definition of done.
So that's where it all comes together. Can you explain a bit more about the definition of done? What is it, and why is it so important?
Think of the definition of done as a quality checklist. It's a shared understanding within the Scrum team of what it means for a piece of work to be truly finished, to meet the required standards for the product.
So it's not just about getting something done, it's about getting it done right.
Exactly. And the moment a product backlog item, a task or feature meets all the criteria in the definition of done, it's considered done, and it becomes part of the increment.
So it's a clear signal. This is ready.
Right. And this shared understanding creates transparency, ensuring everyone knows exactly what finished means. It removes ambiguity, reduces the potential for misunderstandings, and rework down the line.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And if something doesn't meet the definition of done?
It can't be released, and it can't be presented as part of the increment at the sprint review. It goes back to the product backlog to be addressed in a future sprint. No cutting corners.
So the definition of done is really the quality gatekeeper.
It is, and the guide mentions different levels for where that definition of done can come from. Sometimes organizations have company-wide standards for what done means, and every Scrum team has to adhere to those as a minimum. But if those standards don't exist, then the Scrum team itself has to create a definition of done that's appropriate for their specific product.
Makes sense.
And no matter where it comes from, the developers are the ones responsible for making sure the work meets those standards. And if you've got multiple Scrum teams working on the same product, it's essential that they all use the same definition of done.
So there's consistency across the board.
Exactly. That way, all the increments they create will seamlessly integrate and maintain a consistent level of quality.
We've really covered the whole spectrum of Scrum in this deep dive. We've gone through the definition, the theory, the values, the Scrum team roles, the events, the artifacts, and those all-important commitments. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And as we wrap things up, I think it's worth mentioning that the Scrum Guide ends on a pretty powerful note.
Yeah, it really drives home a crucial point.
It emphasizes that Scrum is free for anyone to use. You don't have to pay to access this framework. But it also makes it clear that the structure and the rules outlined in the Scrum Guide are immutable. They can't be changed, and you can't just pick and choose which parts you like.
So no cherry picking.
Right. It says that if you only implement certain elements of Scrum, you're not really doing Scrum, you're doing something else. True Scrum is about embracing the entire framework.
It's a package deal.
It is. But that doesn't mean you can't use other techniques and methodologies alongside Scrum. In fact, the guide encourages it. It sees Scrum as a container, a framework that can be enhanced and adapted by incorporating other practices that fit your needs.
Okay, so it's not about being rigid, but about using Scrum as a solid foundation.
Precisely. And the guide also takes a moment to acknowledge the key players, the people who are instrumental in developing and refining Scrum in its early days. Folks like Jeff Sutherland, Jeff McKenna, John Scumnio-Tails, Ken Schwaber, Mike Smith, and Chris Martin.
The pioneers.
Right. And it mentions that Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland first presented Scrum to the world back in 1995 at the OPSLA conference, which was a landmark moment in documenting their collective learnings and establishing the first official definition of Scrum.
So it's been around for a while.
Over 30 years. And the Scrum Guide is presented as an evolving document. It's been continually updated to reflect how Scrum has grown and matured, thanks to the ongoing work of Sutherland and Schwaber.
It's a living document, just like those Scrum artifacts we talked about.
Exactly. And while the Scrum Guide is the definitive source for understanding Scrum, it acknowledges that there are many other valuable resources out there. Books, articles, websites, all offering additional insights and practical advice on how to apply Scrum effectively.
So it's a whole ecosystem of knowledge.
It is. And finally, the guide gives a shout out to some of the first organizations to adopt Scrum and prove its effectiveness. Individual Inc., Newspage, Fidelity Investments, and IDX, which is now part of GE Medical.
The early adopters, the trailblazers.
Exactly. So let's sum it all up. This deep dive has shown us that Scrum is a deceptively simple, yet surprisingly powerful framework for tackling complex work.
Simple in its structure, powerful in its impact.
Right. It's built on iterative and incremental development, guided by the principles of empiricism learning by doing and lean thinking, maximizing value, and minimizing waste. And at the heart of it all are those three pillars: transparency, inspection, and adaptation, all working in concert to drive continuous improvement.
It's all connected.
It is. And the success of Scrum hinges on the entire Scrum team, the developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master, fully embracing and living those 5 core values we talked about: commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. They use the structured Scrum events, the sprint planning, the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective, and those tangible Scrum artifacts, the product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment, along with their commitments to consistently deliver value.
So they've got the tools, the framework, the values, the mindset. They have everything they need to thrive.
They do. And as you reflect on all these core principles of Scrum, here's a final thought for you. Think about your own work, your team, even your personal projects. Where could embracing a more transparent, a more adaptive approach lead to breakthroughs?
Yeah, what small steps could you take to get faster feedback on your progress, to really deliver more value in everything you do?
It's a question worth pondering, a question that might spark some exciting new possibilities.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll be back with more explorations soon.
Until next time.